Welcome back, everyone, to R2Kast number 70. Today, as I say every time, is an interesting one, but it's an interesting one for two reasons. One, interesting story about an interesting organisation, but two, because it is the start of our new series as part of the R2Kast, which I can't come up with a cool name. R2Kast was really fun, but I can't seem to come up with anything for R2 this. Anyway, we'll get there soon enough. It's going to be a group podcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have charities, I'm going to have breed societies, I'm going to have maybe a committee, your local young farmers club, that sort of thing. A group of people talking about one organisation, hearing from different sides of that organisation and what all those people involved have done with the past of their life and what they're doing as part of the organisation now. So it's a new challenge. Really looking forward to it. Back in R2Kast number 62, I filmed with my dad. I am currently today going to be filming with, as well, there's going to be 5 people on camera today, but one of them is an uncle of mine. So he is one of the people involved in today's organisation, which is Countryside Learning Scotland. I'm not going to try and ruin any given examples about what they are or all that sort of thing. So I'm going to pass you on to Ian. So Ian Robertson is going to tell you about who he is, his role in CLS. Yep, got it right that time. And then we'll move through the rest of the team. So Ian, would you like to say hello and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Wallace. So I'm Executive Director of Countryside Learning Scotland. We are a charity, but we're also a business.
Before we get on into another excellent episode of the R2Kast, I would just like to thank the sponsor for the show today, The Scottish Farmer. A weekly magazine highlighting everything you need to know regarding the Scottish agricultural industry, whether it's breaking news, events happening in the sector, market reports, classified ads, or just wholesome stories happening in the industry. The Scottish Farmer's got it for you.
So we're keen to try and promote the countryside in general. We're trying to place ourselves in the third sector really as the organisation who delivers education across all aspects of rural, and that includes everything from recreation and adventure through to traditional land uses, and also the environment and conservation areas of careers particularly, which is obviously a key area moving forward at the moment in the countryside. So my own background, my career started as a countryside ranger in Muirshiel Park in Lochwinnoch. I started there as a seasonal ranger before moving into my real passion at the time, which was rugby union. And I worked for Scottish Rugby for about 12 years as a development officer, coached at district level, worked with international teams, was lucky to do that and had a great experience there, which taught me a lot about organisation of events, project management, a huge, really diverse range of transferable skills in there. Came out of rugby union and went into promoting tourism in country sports, so quite specific on the country sports side, which was my real passion in life, and obviously with relations in the farming industry, one of which is running this podcast this evening. We had a bit of a broad spectrum of the traditional side of rural life, but also trained at Jordan Hill College in sport in the community, and was very heavily involved in that, in recreation adventure through that. So very much a foot in what I saw as both sides of the countryside and the opportunities that people have in the countryside to improve their lives, whether that be through hunting, fishing and shooting, or whether it be through kayaking, rock climbing, sports, whatever. So well placed to be sitting in this position with a broad spectrum of opportunities in the countryside for health and well-being, and also with the relatively new opportunity of environmental issues that are that everybody's having to work with now, quite rightly. And we're just trying to be in a position where we can stay very apolitical and just deliver the reality of the countryside and the balance of social, economic and environmental issues. I think there's an awful lot of silo groups at the moment who are very passionate about either particular species or particular areas of country life, and personally I don't think that's particularly helpful. So part of my interest in getting involved in this was to try and reduce conflict in the countryside, more understanding, more respect for different industries, and understanding that we have to feed the country. We also have to provide jobs in the rural sector. We have to improve the community and give community opportunities and retain community aspects and retain young people in these communities. So all of these aspects came together to produce the plan we have for CLS, which we will go into a bit more depth later. So I moved on. Yeah, sorry, Wilson.
No, I was just saying, very good. I'd probably quite a good time in there. We will jump back onto that to move on to the rest of the team we have on the call. We've got 3 other people here at the minute. Maybe expecting one more. Had some Wi-Fi issues, and to be honest, I was late myself. Brian, it makes sense to jump on to you next, purely because I was introduced to you first. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, who you were before you were involved with Countryside Learning Scotland, and what brought you here?
Yes. Hi, Wallace. Hi, everyone. My name is Bryony. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Pathways for Rural Work in the Cairngorm. So my work is very much with the schools in and around the sort of geographical boundary of the national park. I suppose my route into this is perhaps not quite as linear and closely connected as Ian's and perhaps the other guys here as well. So I started out as in the health and wellbeing sector, actually, running my own business as an acupuncturist. And when COVID hit, a lot of my work dried up. I was furloughed. Everything looked a little bit uncertain. So I spent a lot of time thinking about perhaps what my next steps were. And it comes back to what was important to me, what I valued in my own life. And I'd say the countryside and our kind of natural environment is a really important part of always. It's certainly very important to me. And that prompted a bit of a career change. I came up to Aberdeen and studied ecology and conservation master's degree and decided that I wanted to promote the countryside to everybody, whether that was through work, through living, through recreation, and kind of led me to this role in Countryside Learning Scotland, which is very much a kind of people orientated at the kind of people interface of countryside.
I think that sort of people interface is important, and I very much feel that, like, no matter what business you're in, even if it's some kind of techie business, that sort of people side is the most important thing, especially if you're dealing with kids, and especially if you're dealing with an industry like, I'm going to say ours when I'm specifically agriculture, but the rural industry where that sort of face-to-face is so important. You mentioned at the start as well, Bryony, that your entrance into this wasn't as linear as Ian's, and sort of almost, when you look at Ian's sort of background, almost everything he's done seems to lead to this. Yeah, I think that's just as important. You know, there's so many transferable skills alongside different industries everywhere, and you'll be picking up various things from like health and well-being, like you said, and everything's important. Health and well-being, very important in education. You know, so yeah, thank you to that. I'm sure we'll come back. Well, I'm not sure. We will come back. I don't know why I say as if that's your time. That was good to hear. Kirsty, could you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Wallace. Kirsty here from rural Click Manager. I am the part-time fundraising and comms communications coordinator. My background a long time ago was initial degree in marketing and comms, and I worked in the financial sector, working for Scottish Widows and Tesco Bank, basically communicating about financial products. I did that for a number of years, and we moved down south. Then I worked in PR agencies, actually a rural base. It's funny how these things work out. I actually worked in a barn conversion on a farm in Oxfordshire a very long time ago, but it was a very corporate world I worked within, but I was based in a beautiful place, and actually where I got my first Jack Russell, but that is a side story. And so I worked in PR down there for quite a while, and then with my husband's job, and we come back up here, and I worked again in communications for the third sector. I then stopped to start a family. I studied a postgrad in environmental management and worked for SEPA, for some people would say the other side sometimes, depending what sector you work in. So I worked for SEPA in communications for a couple of years there. And then I had a wee bit of time off, and I needed something quite flexible, which was, I saw this job came up rurally. I knew a couple of the trustees and people that were involved in the charity. The outdoor and the countryside has been a massive part of my life. My mum's side of the family are farmers, so I spent a lot of time on farms growing up in the school holidays, lambing season, etc. Spent a lot of time walking the hills. So it was a way of combining my skills, which is marketing and PR, with my interests and how I spend my time, and with kind of getting as many people to learn about the benefits of being outside, whether you're urban or whether you're from that background or not. And that was sort of the draw. My job really is to support these guys who are actually at the coalface, if you like, going out actually doing all the work with the young people and to help them communicate it, to help them, you know, the stories behind it, how to explain to people what's involved, to sort of make it sort of, you know, so less dry, to get their interest and see the sort of myriad opportunities that are available. So that's my job. And the other part of my job, which I spend a lot of time doing, is getting money in to keep us going.
Yeah, important, very important.
If we're not here, we can't do anything.
These things are difficult to do with no money, that's for sure.
Exactly.
And it'll probably be a thing I actually come up to as we move on. We're all going into this very questionable winter financially. Some of us maybe in better places than others given, but with rural education, with the whole idea of getting food on the plate to the masses is one question that we don't know what the answer to is. We might even talk about that as we go. What did the masters involve, Kirsty? Just out of interest.
Actually, I'm not sure if they knew what I was going into. I thought it was sort of greener and more conservation based than I realised. So it was Oxford Brookes University I did that at, and they're very well known for their environmental impact assessment course and their strategic environmental assessment. Right. So that's what I became qualified to do. I learned about things I haven't used, to be honest. I've never actually done an EIA in the real world, and contaminated land and a little bit of conservation because I chose that. So it really qualified me to go and work for an environmental consultancy, basically.
Excellent. And you mentioned about you were with SEPA for a bit, and sometimes the other side, and that's a narrative we got to change. You know, it's so true. And I have agricultural students. Some of them are 16, and that's such a clear, you know, thing. And we brought a lady, Jackie McComb from SEPA, in to meet your students last week, and they were like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." Like, yeah, exactly. It does make sense.
That's so true. I think the trouble with, I think a lot of it is with us sort of government organisations, this can happen sometimes. It's a communication that can let us down, let them down sometimes. Yeah. And I worked in the Water Framework Directive, and it's quite complex.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just kind of simplifying things.
No, very. And the last person to introduce, last but by no means least, first off, who I think's got a fantastic name, Tors, would you like to say hello and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, nice to meet you, Wallace, and everyone. Yes, I'm Tors. It's short for Victoria, so my full name isn't as exciting as what most people know me as. But yes, so my background, originally I started off as a geography teacher in secondary schools after doing a geography degree, so come from a bit of a different slant into it. And though I was teaching, I realised the bit that I loved about it was being outside. So my career took me outside and into rural areas fairly quickly by working for for the Field Studies Council. So worked as a tutor doing field work and actually adventurous activities as well, which I did for over a decade, working with them. So teaching, but also out and about and dealing with a whole load of different issues between and helping young people to achieve their qualifications through schools. So I was in that role for a while, working at different sites across the UK, and then went into work for another charity in the Cairngorms for a while, and had done a day or two actually with CLS through previous work with Field Studies Council, and went into the role because I wanted to work again more with schools. So came back to doing some more work with schools and staying outside. So I think I've always been drawn more to the outside, even though I love working with young people and working in that arena. You know, I grew up in farming and I grew up in rural areas. There's always been that draw there. So that's kind of been the theme through most of the work that I've done. Yeah,
and the opportunity to combine the two is just what you're after, you know. No, brilliant. And I probably should say, I forgot to say this off camera, this is the first time I've ever done this sort of group thing. So I'm going to say one thing. I wanted to get to know you all first and get the viewers to know you all. And if you're listening, guys, I hope that's to the viewers. I assume you guys are hearing me. The viewers, if you're still listening, let me know. Give me some tips about this type of podcast type. This is new to me. I've obviously done 69 before now, but 70 here is the first time trying this. So any tips would be great. One thing I'm going to say, I'm going to throw a few questions out that are sort of just questions. I'm not going to direct anything directly anymore. So just whoever you think's best to answer it between the four of you, you guys can decide. First off, I assume this is more certainly a starter for Ian, but why, you sort of alluded to it earlier, Ian, but why did you start this? And also playing, how old is this?
So the organisation's been running since 2003. We were initially set up through the Scottish Countryside Alliance. I then came back into this in 2014, and at that point I spoke to the trustees and directors regarding the support we had through the Scottish Countryside Alliance. And for me, that was too narrow a field. They were very focused, obviously, on traditional rural sports. And I had a different vision, along with one or two of the trustees, who decided that we should expand what we did. And from an education point of view, the countryside doesn't work in silos. It needs to be looked at holistically. So that decision was made. We rebranded as Countryside Learning Scotland in 2014. And from there, the focus was very much to look at expanding into all aspects of the industries that underpin the opportunities, but also the opportunities themselves that are provided for people to engage with the countryside across the whole gambit of look out your window. And I actually, when I took the job on, I was working for a private estate at the time, and I went up onto the top of the hill with a notepad and sat down and asked myself the question, what can I see round about me that could be educational to young people, or any people for that matter? And I think about 4 hours later, I was still writing. And I thought, how the hell am I going to get this into, with at that time, one part-time member of staff plus myself, how are we going to deliver something of meaning that's going to actually make a difference? So over the last 6 or 7 years, we've now built up to, obviously, the 3 girls that are here and the staff that are here, plus Douglas. So we've now got, a good head of staff around the country. We're aiming to get better coverage as we go forward and more funding to do that. But in reality, that was the picture. It was trying to take something from a 1 day a week event, 1 day a year potentially, or less, for young people, like most third sectors have the capacity to deliver. Third sector organisations, sorry. But actually, how much good does that do? Taking a young person in primary 4 or 5, giving them a day out in the countryside in one particular sector, and expecting that to engage them. It may or may not, but the reality is there's not enough follow through. So we wanted to create a programme that was more focused on secondary school for starters, because there was a real gap there. We did a bit of feasibility work and realised that there was really good work going on with organisations like RET and many other organisations that were delivering in the third sector at primary level. But the secondary school stage was really difficult because it was focused on subject based. So getting large numbers of young people through the programme was difficult. But actually, since we've started this programme and focused on secondary age group, and a progressive programme of awareness into work experience and placements, and then into that transition phase for kids through into work, creating that progressive pathway in geographical areas is becoming really successful. And the businesses who are obviously going to benefit from this, with having more better skilled young people coming out of school and being more aware of the opportunities in the rural sector, they're beginning to see the benefit of it and are excited by it, because recruitment is a big issue just now. There's no doubt about that.
I think you're right about that gap. I mean, I meant to put you in touch with a guy called Alex Reynolds, who's very much inside the school side of things from a secondary perspective, and that's a place he wants to push, because RET is doing well at primary school, sort of getting that, this is what a farm is, getting that grounding. But you made a really good point there about sort of that transition from event to normality. Like, it should just be part of the curriculum. You learn about so much in school, and there's all this rural industry that I remember you said, is it not something like 96% of the land that kids are coming from going into school or something?
So the government statistics, Scottish government statistics, are 98% of the Scottish land mass is classed as rural, and 17% of the population live in that land mass. Now you can argue that, out of that 17% that are living rurally, there's probably, I mean, this is not a statistic, but I imagine maybe 4% of that are people who are directly linked to working in the countryside. Mm-hmm. So it's a tiny community so we've got this massive conflict between a very rural country and a very urbanised population, that we want to engage with the countryside, but in a responsible manner, with an understanding and respect of the industries that drive it. And that's what's missing for me at the moment. And the media portray a very romantic, fluffy, world that is out there, but in actual fact, it's only there in the way that it is because it's been created by the private sector and people who run the countryside and work in the countryside. So our role is really to try and give that information out to the general public through young people, but also to make them aware that yes, you can go and enjoy it and recreate in the countryside responsibly, but also there's a work opportunity there if you want to go down that route. And that's really what Pathways to Rural Work's about. That's what it says in the tin, providing that progressive pathway through secondary education to go from either just to engage with it and enjoy it and understand it more at the younger age groups, or to continue that progression and look at becoming somebody who works in the industries that provide that opportunity, or provide food, or provide tourism, or provide whatever, hospitality, whatever it may be, the trades, all the rural trades and so on. People who are, window cleaners, for example, in urban environments, generally use step ladders. But if you're trying to do window cleaning in a castle in the middle of the island, you need a rope access qualification, So there's all sorts of additional exciting information that's out there for young people. And to be honest, the teachers are the same. Our teaching population are quite frankly in the same situation as the general population, that most of our teaching population are urban people. So we can't expect them to deliver rural information without training them to do so. So part of the programme is to train teachers and give them that information and give them the awareness of the careers that are out there. And that programme's been really successful.
Yeah, definitely. And well, yeah, it's hard to get through to kids if you're not getting through to teachers. Is it? Yeah. This is maybe one for everyone. Is it solely secondary, or are you still in primary schools?
Yeah, no, we won't ignore primary schools, but with the resources we have to focus quite closely on delivering this project. So we won't turn down a primary school if we've got the resources to deliver it. We'll certainly provide them with resources. We'll provide them with links to other organisations. So if they come to us looking for something to do with environmental or farming, for example, then we would direct them to RET and so on, would link up with the other organisations. We're very much a facilitation organisation. What you see in film here is really what we've got as a resource, and a fantastic resource it is, but it's limited. And, we want to, with a lot of our events, we can only specialise in so many areas. So we can bring in, we're connected with all the other rural organisations, and where there's a speciality required, we'll request them to come and attend an event and help with that event. So, and that goes for the businesses as well. So we'll bring in private forestry groups to come and show off their fancy machinery, or we'll bring in government forestry groups to come and bring their simulator so they can chop up trees on a video machine, and engage kids that way. So yeah, it's very much focused on secondary for this stage of our development as an organisation. That's not to say we'll not go back to that as we progress and hopefully expand enough to be able to engage primary as well.
Yeah, I think that's what sets us apart slightly as well, because we are the only, and I use this in fundraising applications all the time, we're the only Scottish, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but we are the only Scottish charity within the rural sector that works solely with the secondary sector. So, that is our area of expertise. So whereby obviously, as Ian said, we wouldn't turn schools away as such. That is our niche, if you like.
That's good though, and as I said, it's a niche that's sort of missing. It really is. We've got the nursery stuff's probably good. They're covering it. They're talking about farm animals, and then you get into primary school, and I think RET are filling that niche, and then you go past secondary school, and there's SRUC, and there's other options aside SRUC as well, or you go out with Scotland for that sort of thing. You're at the age you can do that. But that secondary niche was really missing something aside. Torres, you were a geography teacher. Apart from, I'm just sort of trying to take myself back to secondary school. Apart from talking about subsistence farming in South America and stuff, and higher geography, I don't really think I did anything on the farming side in secondary school. So, and correct me if I'm wrong there, Torres, maybe there is more on that side of things, but
so yeah, there is farming within the geography syllabus, but again, you have to remember they're working with the resources that they have, and as much, we have to do as much as possible to kind of help and promote, and also give them up-to-date information about what's going on, because it's very easy when you're only teaching a topic for, you know, a couple of weeks, to use the resources that, you know, work and are there and that are being taught across. And also remember, you're teaching to a specification for the students to be able to achieve their qualification, but some of that can go out of date very quickly. I mean, I remember myself going through school and being taught about CAP when I knew CAP was no longer something that, but it was in the syllabus. So yeah, that was what the information they had to put across, rather than actually what was more up to date. And I suppose we give the opportunity to allow students to find out about what's happening in rural areas now, and also what will potentially be there in the future when they come out of school or come out of university, whatever pathway they choose, that, you know, the careers that were potentially there in the past, or what they perceive as the career, isn't actually what it is on the ground now. And that's important for them to understand, and understand the skills they might need from school as well, to make the most of those careers, and to actually have their eyes open when they go into them.
I think you've put that very well there, that the sort of showcasing careers that they're not strictly the way we see them on telly, or we know. That's a really good point. Never fully considered that, in fairness. One thing that I always talk about was when I was in school, there was I vividly remember this mind map that was on a notice board in my school that said, and this was just agriculture, and there honestly must have been 100 little jobs that came off of that mind map, and I wish I'd taken a photo of it. And if there was one, just the rural sector, I mean, you would create a world. You know, there's so much in this industry, and I think I have a lot of students that come on and I'm like, you know, what's your plan? And they'll be like, to work on a farm. Perfect, by the way, very important. You know, milk cows, drive tractors, all this sort of thing. And there's normally one in the class that will say something along the lines of sales or that sort of thing. And you see them like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's another thing that's related. So yeah, it's a massive industry, and I think you guys are doing a great job of sort of showcasing that to the secondary pupils. Brian,
I think that, sorry, just before you go on, I think the one thing we've found as we've run this programme is that as Tor's highlighted, the perceptions are always dangerous in every industry, and people think they know everything about everything, but actually when you dig into it, we all know nothing. And I think it's become very clear that, you know, the perception of rural careers and I'm being very general here, of course there's teachers who have got very in-depth knowledge about this, and if the pupils in that school are lucky enough to have an individual like that, they get to know about this. But in reality, the perception is still that for rural, read, shovel and dung, manual labour, low-level, low-paid jobs, which are actually, as you know, in farming, are less and less now because of technology, because of IT and so on. And part of our training programme is based around two areas. One is future of rural, which Tors has highlighted, and that we look at that specifically to each area. So in the northwest, for example, fish farming is a big employer, crofting's a big employer. In the east and Tayside, arable farming is a big employer, horticulture is a big employer. So it's different geographically. So we're trying impart that knowledge, but so future of rural is important, but also diversity of rural is the other aspect of training, to show people and showcase what rural does offer. And as you've highlighted, you know, who would have thought that a window cleaner would have, I've used this example already, would need a rope access qualification, you know? So, you know, there's many transferable skills, but also there's for want of a better phrase, the professional careers, you know, the rural solicitor who specifically works with private estates, there's factors, there's all the professional careers that actually people don't get. They still think of rural, and the perception is it's just about manual labour careers, and that's something we're desperately trying to break. You know, we've had schools coming to us saying, you're not getting the R2Kast students because they're going to university. That's not relevant, and the teachers generally believe that. When in actual fact, when you then highlight to them the rural careers that are high-level careers, they go, oh, well, maybe we better bring them along then. So there's that sales pitch we've got to do to the schools to say, don't miss out for these students. It's not just the kids who are struggling academically we want them as well, of course, but we also want the whole gambit. And I think that's a perception that needs to be broken in secondary schools, and we're doing our best to do that.
And there's the term you used there, Ian, kids struggling academically. There's more metrics to sort of knowledge than just knowing 8 or 9 subjects in school. There's so many perfect examples of folk leave school and then they shine. I mean, you probably know just as well as anyone. I was okay at school, but really didn't do well. Went to uni sort of in the mindset that I kind of just want to have fun here. And then realised, oh wait, this is for me. And then I went on and did a master's degree because I just loved the thing I was doing. There's so many different ways, or you can go in, your practical skills, practical knowledges. There's so many different careers out there. I'm conscious that I spoke to Bryony. I've never actually fully spoke about her role in the organisation. Bryony, could you tell us a bit about with CLS? I focused more on your time before and forgot to ask about that side of it.
Sorry, so repeat that question. My time before CLS?
Yeah, no, I focused more on that before. I forgot to ask you about your sort of actual job with Countryside Learning. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I delivered the Pathways to Rural Work project on the ground. So the 5 schools I work with are Kingussie, Grant and Grammar, Speyside High, Afford and Aboyne academies. So there's 5 very geographically spread schools with very different student interests, student passions, kind of very different rural landscapes around them, and lots of different knowledge sets as well within the school and within the students. So my work is very much figuring out, teasing from the schools where perhaps they have gaps in that knowledge and gaps in those experiences, and plugging those with hands-on experience days, with work placement opportunities, skill development opportunities, all of those kinds of things, everything that's encapsulated in that pathway Ian was talking about earlier, from very much of the awareness phase and just an understanding of what's going on around them and the activities that happen and where they fit within that, right through to, I know what career I want to go into, what steps do I need to take and facilitate them on those steps.
Excellent. And we mentioned earlier that sort of idea, and I'm guessing the answer to this question is going to be slightly away from what I was probably expecting had I thought this an hour ago before I started speaking to you. You sort of tried to move away from that event of rural education and really trying to change that sort of into this should just be here, which is great. So I'm guessing it's not you guys go into schools, it's more you spend time with teachers, you spend time sort of speaking with do you speak with SQA, that sort of thing as well? So an integration into curriculum. How does that side of Countryside Learning actually work?
Well, I definitely say it's partnership based. Everything is about capturing that individual that knows the most, or perhaps can talk about it as passionately and with as much information, knowledge as possible, and sharing that through those events. So we're certainly not and cannot be experts in absolutely everything, and rightly not. So it's about picking on and reaching out to organizations, businesses, education organizations, and essentially tapping into their skills and knowledge to share that and kind of inspire students through them.
Yeah, that partnership side's important, and everyone being involved, and it would be silly to assume there's going to be someone that was a master of all trades, and that's where that's probably where the flaws have came in. You mentioned earlier, Tors, about the whole idea of you've got a geography teacher and suddenly they've got to know the farming side, they've got to know all this, and you almost there's a name in the States for it. Is it the peanut butter effect, or is it the peanut butter jelly effect, or something like that? Spreading yourself too thin, trying to learn everything, but not really actually learning it with much depth, I guess. One thing I quite like to ask a lot of people that come on the podcast, whatever they do, is how did COVID impact things? Did that change things? This might be more an Ian question, or maybe not. I'm just guessing there. But how did that impact the sort of operations day to day?
Well, I think it certainly impacted the rest of the staff differently than it impacted me. From my point of view, it was about how is this organisation going to survive through this period. Our funders were tremendous in that they, across the board, they recognised that we had to just tick over and survive, and all the plans we had, all the promises we made in our applications were just not able to be fulfilled. We couldn't get access to schools. So we did our best to, like a lot of organisations, to do what we could virtually. So we set up our teacher training programme, which was a face-to-face on-site programme. We turned that into a 4-session virtual session programme with teachers, and delivered that online, which of course didn't have the same quality as face-to-face, but it got the point across, and that we kept that running. And we're following that up with practical sessions off the back of these sessions with the teachers we worked with through that period. We set up a live chat scenario where we were engaging with rural workers that were out in the field, asking them to take short snapshots of what they do and linking them up with live chat with schools. So the kids were in the school, the workers were out in the field, and they demonstrated a bit of what they did, and the kids asked them questions about their careers and so on. Similar to this, how did you get into it? Where did you come from? And that sort of thing. So the live chat was set up. So these were actually some real positives from COVID, because we've kept them going, and it allows us to deliver more. As obviously the live events take a lot of putting together, a lot of organisation, risk assessments, making sure everybody's safe, and so on, and working with a lot of partners. So it's much more time consuming. So it was a very useful thing financially. Everybody else was furloughed, and I carried on and managed to fundraise, which allowed us to employ Kirsty with a fundraising position. So that's actually helped us to expand the company. It allowed me to focus on one particular area instead of spinning the plates and keeping the company running. So there was a if you want to look at it in a glass half full, there was quite a lot of good things came out of it. The loss was, of course, that the young people, that we were just starting the programme and we lost a bit of momentum. But credit to the girls and to Douglas. The last 6 months, the calendar has just filled up massively. They've just put a great number of events in, and the programme's kicking off again. So it put us back a couple of years for sure, but we managed to survive. We managed to grow the organisation even within that period, which not many people did. So we're quite proud of that. And off the back of that, just a few weeks ago, we got the Scottish Land Estates Helping It Happen Award for communities, working with communities for our ADHD Rural Connect programme, which is part of Pathways to Rural Work. So these are some things that maybe wouldn't have happened without COVID. We might have been slower in our development, but it gave us the chance to focus in on the business side of it to grow the company, to get to where we are now. So, but I think maybe interesting to hear what the others think about that as well.
Definitely, yeah.
I can jump in. So I'd say, Ian talks about it very much from a CLS perspective, but actually that was kind of mirrored with everybody that you spoke to and wanted to engage with, both in schools. There was very much a kind of just trying to get through it and kind of meet their basic targets, but the same with rural businesses as well. And so I think that it felt very much like the doors were closed often, and it was about how do you take advantage of what you could do given the restraints and the restrictions. So, and environments like this were very, very familiar, but I think, as we got more used to it, became as impactful, probably not always as impactful, but certainly had the impact we wanted to achieve in these kinds of environments.
And I think you mentioned these types of environments, Bryony. Thankfully, if it wasn't for this podcast, I would never be on Zoom. I wanted so far away from Zoom, so far away from Teams forever. But it's good for this sort of thing. And I think Ian, you and I actually had a conversation once in your living room talking about, yes, it was boring purely being on that for 2 years, but it has now opened up a lot of opportunities for, I would never be able to do this sort of thing with as many people as I do. And Zoom and Teams have been the norm. We understand them. Everyone knows what they are now. And there's an opportunity to use them. But it's so much better to venture into that. Just new normal feels wrong now. I think it's just normal. We're normal again. It's been so much easier for so many things. And you mentioned ADHD. For someone with ADHD, learning or even trying to engage in any form on this type of medium must have been so difficult.
Yeah.
And you guys have obviously done well in that specific sector as well. So that's good to hear. what you mentioned the award there. What did you guys do that led to that coming? That's just one award, obviously, but it's quite an interesting one you've mentioned.
I hope you've kicked your feet up and got comfy and enjoying another fantastic episode of the R2Kast with another really interesting guest. I would just like to quickly take another second to plug the sponsors of the show today, the Scottish Farmer, and I would strongly advise you to go out and pick one up this week and see even more of the fantastic people that are in our industry.
Well, I think it was partly, I mean, the main programme of Pathways to Rural Work, which is that progressive triangle, if you like, of awareness into work placement, into transition to work and further education. That's the core work of the coordinators, but outside that we have a Rural Volunteer Award, which is designed to engage businesses, to help employees. You don't go into a rural job to have 30 screaming kids running at you. You know, that's not what most people go into rural work for. So there's an education process required there. And every other industry, my background is in sport, and obviously working with young people, there's a lot of training opportunities there. But there was nothing in the rural sector that was specific to teaching people how to work with young people, how to keep themselves safe, the kids safe, and just to know how to teach and engage with young people. So we run that programme for businesses, and we also run teacher training. So these are the two sort of national programmes we run alongside the regional outreach programme. So that programme was, obviously we're working with a myriad of partners between Skill Development Scotland, Scottish Land Estates, the Cairngorms part, and so on, hundreds of partners we're working with now. So, you know, word gets about, and we were nominated by somebody for the programme through Pathways to Rural Work. We started the pilot with Perth Grammar School to look at ADHD, and TORS as part of TORS's remit to deliver that in the short term, alongside everything else that she does. But we're desperately trying to fundraise to get enough to employ somebody part-time to deliver that specific pilot. But at the moment we're running that. Again, the programme there is designed to help these young people with their awareness of self, which is part of the ADHD issue, confidence, employability skills, finding out what engages them. And you've highlighted it, Wallace, that, you know, anybody will learn quickly if they enjoy what they're learning. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. You know, if you're shoved behind a desk and you hate it, you're just not going to learn. You're going to rebel whether you've got ADHD or not. And that's so creating that broad spectrum of the diversity of rural for young people with ADHD. They may engage with animals more than they do. Some of them might engage with machinery. You just, until you put them in that environment, you don't know. So basically, we've started that process just recently. We've picked, if we're looking at rural businesses around the Perth area, we've got a business seminar coming up sponsored by NFU Mutual, who have been really supportive, and they've hosted this event, and we're going to bring in some of their clients who will be rural businesses to try and engage them in the process. So that kind of work has just raised the profile. Now, we have no idea who nominated us for this award. We've tried to find out, but nobody seems to know. So we're quite happy not to know, but whoever it was out there, if you're listening, thank you very much. But it's been great, and it's, you know, to get the recognition of your peers, which is effectively what it is. There's nothing better. We're on the map now. We've been spending the last 7 years trying to get on the map, and we're now on the map. So it's been a real feather in everybody's cap, to all our staff and the trustees. And, you know, we feel as if we're making a difference now, and that award will definitely help that. And, you know, the fact it was for ADHD Rural Connect, which is a tag on to Pathways to Rural Work, that doesn't really matter for me. It's the fact that the rural industries are recognising CLS now as an organisation that delivers across the rural sectors, and that's what's important, you know.
Yeah.
So the answer to the question is I don't know who knows this.
It's almost nice you don't know, and also not sponsored by NFU Mutual, but you said it and that was there. As well. Tors, could you maybe, Ian said you were it was almost part of your remit. Well, not almost, it's part of your remit. Could you maybe mention sort of what sort of things that's involving at the minute with schools and pushing of that? I don't know, would you call it a project? That's not the word.
Pilot project. Yeah.
Pilot project,
yeah. Yeah, it is a pilot project. So yeah, it comes under my remit. So I do a similar role to Bryony in terms of I'm a regional coordinator, but my region is Tayside, which is just slightly bigger than Bryony's.
Competition here as well. It's what?
So I cover Angus, Dundee, Perth and Kinross. There's around 30 secondary schools within that area. So it's working through with those different schools and assisting them any way I can. And so we've been working quite closely with Perth and Kinross ADHD support with this pilot project. So with it being in Tayside is how it falls into my remit as well, which is how it's become part of my role at the moment as we're doing this pilot project. In terms of what that entails for that specific project is we're working with one specific school, which is Perth Grammar, and working with students that they have put forward for this. And it's working in a slightly different way in terms of where, as Ian alluded to earlier, we're trying to promote the skills that they need for employment, because a lot of the stats show that these young people are going to have less access to employment, and that's for a whole variety of reasons. And what we're doing is working on those their sense of self and their soft skills, and also giving them exposure to different opportunities that are there for them. That some of these students are very disengaged from learning and opportunities that might be out there, because again, as we've talked about, students in the whole, they might not be aware of what's even there or possible. So it's bringing that forward to them and allowing them to try some of that. The other part of it as well is working with the employers to help promote that understanding of they may have to have more patience and work maybe slightly differently with these young people, to allow for the fact that they are still working through the best way for them to learn and engage and to take on employment. And that's sometimes just in how they communicate, in terms of the best way for them to receive instructions so that they can undertake tasks, and then being confident to get that across to somebody in terms of, can you break that down for me, or can you maybe just give it to me one bit at a time so I can do it and understand it, or can you demonstrate it twice because I pick it up better that way. Being able to communicate and say that actually gives them better chances in employment and retaining employment as well. So it's recognizing those, promoting those skills and working that with the young people is really, really valuable, in particular for them to get them into those different roles and opportunities.
I think one of my favorite things as an educator is finding how everyone ticks. You know, like, oh, this person learns that way, this person learns that way. And I mean, my method of teaching the whole group is pretty out there, let's just have a bit of crack for an hour and a half and we'll cover everything at some point. You know, like that sort of, and some folk, the majority of folk that works for, because you said, Ian, about you've got to enjoy it. It works for that part. Some folk think, well, he's just an annoying bearded man, this isn't doing anything for me. And then you find out this thing works for them and a video works for them. It's great. And it's good that we're sort of going over that. And Bryony, you had said that it's important to sort of approach this with passion. And I'm certainly seeing between the four of you, where did threeing come from? Seeing between the four of you that passion thing is definitely something none of you are missing. I haven't met Douglas tonight, obviously, but I can only assume, given the rest of the team, that is the case. And with that, we also mentioned earlier that sort of reduction in momentum for you guys because of COVID. I've seen it with students, you'll have seen it with pupils. It hit them from an education perspective as well. And this is probably a question for you, Kirsty, that that block, there's just this block that I've got students that are third year. They're a great group of students. They were my first years, but they just had that missed bit. How are you guys making sure that sort of that progression into post-COVID is hitting as it should? And I assume that involves a lot of funding. And how does that funding come about, Kirsty? What's involved in gaining that funding?
I think when you mentioned about sort of how the COVID affected, and this links to it, it's not a positive that's come out of it in any way, but the positive being access to funds. So COVID has caused massive mental health problems for young people, and attendance issues, and a whole raft of problems in terms of education. But with that is because of the way that we work and because of the outdoor aspect of our work, and one of its benefits being obviously being outside has got huge positive impacts in terms of mental health. That really helped us in our application. So we could say, yes, we're all about increasing the number of young people going into the rural industry, but there is this side effect, this byproduct, if you like. At the same time, we're lifting their mental health because we're taking them outside of the classic classroom academic environment, and we're giving them, well, it's proven being outside, being in nature, it has a really, really positive effect. So I think that has enabled us. I didn't have to change anything. We were already doing that, but just funds were available for that because it's been recognised that there are, as I said, there are huge mental health problems within with a lot of young people, and they're seeing higher levels of truancy, if you like. So attendance statistics are not fantastic. Well, if you've got something to look forward to, maybe you are going to turn up. So there's that element, I think, that we have been able to sort of just naturally sort of hook into because we were doing it anyway. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, completely.
I think, Wallace, as well, that young people respond to, or have traditionally responded to structure. And I think the problem with a lot of this is that COVID destroyed that structure.
Yeah.
There was always a reason not to go, a reason not to do. There was negativity. The day-to-day, structure, sometimes we all complain about it and it's mundane, but actually we thrive on it. And the reality is that by using this program that's a progression through school, those who do engage with it, we're giving them a structure, whether it's within, it's not necessarily behind a desk, but it's a progression, a structure that they can see from secondary one. And they can see that, if I like this, there is a pathway there. And I think providing that structure is the thing that the schools, we've tried to be very empathetic with the schools, because obviously some of the teachers have been off, there's been pressure on classrooms, there's been more pupils in the classrooms, and in that school environment there's probably a lack of understanding to a degree from the general public of the pressures that schools have been under. And even now there's a catch up and a knock-on effect because truancy is higher. The slightest sniffle or cold and kids are staying off school where they wouldn't before, and that's got a knock-on effect to the parents and their business life and them going to their work. And so the whole social aspect is lacking structure because of COVID. And I think what we're trying to do is say, if you want to engage with this, there's a structure here for 6 years of your life through secondary school that will give you a cracking launch pad into where you want to go. And I think creating that structure, the one thing I would say about funding, and it's a bit of a plea to funders, is stop giving us 6 months. I'd rather have, if somebody gives you 50,000 quid for 6 months, I'd rather have that in 2 tranches for a year or 4 tranches for 2 years to create sustainability. It's very difficult to give staff, when you get good staff involved, you want to retain staff, you want to give them a 3-year contract. So funders some of them are coming around to that, and it's great. But some of the COVID funding, and more so from public sector, we're getting 6 months. Here's a tranche of money. It's a good chunk of money. Thanks very much. And there's 6 months. But actually, it's helpful and it's useful. Of course it is. But from a structural point of view, it's better if it's longer term, and engaging with that. And some, we have some funders who are beginning to do that, and they're listening to the people on the ground like ourselves, and they're changing their strategies. So if there's any funders out there listening, help us with that longevity and that structure to give our staff. There's nothing worse than being in a job for a year contract and 6 months down the line you're looking for another contract and we can't give you it. So that's an issue for sustainability for small charities.
I think not less money, but the same money dragged across longer time is never as attractive at like that bang attraction, like the big things, like that. But that security, that sort of longevity you talk of is always important. It's one of those things. This is going on to talk more about today's podcast. The actual thing we're just talking about. Obviously, recorded loads of different things with a lot of individuals over the course of the last 18 months or 20 months, I think, really. And I've sat with couples as well, and I think I've done one podcast with 3 people. But it's really been quite fun to sit down with 4 of you tonight. And see how that dynamic works. I was worried I wasn't able to make sure everyone spoke, but I've heard from everyone. I've heard great stories from everyone, and great stories about CLS as well. In an effort to not talk for 2 hours, because we're probably around the hour mark. We're at the hour mark. There's 2 questions I sort of ask at nearing the end of every R2Kast. I'm going to slightly change them for this group thing, because I don't think one of them really works hand in hand. And by the way, if we've missed anything, Ian, Bryony, Kirsty and Tors, that you would like to say, please say. But I'm going to finish with 2 questions for everyone. First off, where do you see Countryside Learning Scotland being in 5 years' time? So that would make it, so since you really started being on board, that would make it, is that 12, I think? No, 13. And also the second thing was, individually, if you were to bump into someone and asked you, what is Countryside Learning Scotland, what would you say?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I'd like to hear from Ollie, in fairness, so everyone's going to have a shot.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I'm not superstitious, but you had to pick 13 years, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Yeah. No, I mean, the big plan really for this is, we think, and a number of other people think, that Pathways to Rural Work has got a niche. There's a need for it. The businesses recognise they need more young people coming into the rural sector. The teachers recognise that there is a lack of knowledge across the board of teaching about the rural sector and the reality of it and the jobs and opportunities. So there is a need for this project. We've researched it quite deeply before we went into it. Skills Development Scotland and other organisations like Lantern so on are heavily involved with work during and beyond schooling. But this programme, I think, is wider than that. And where I would like to see this programme is to have national coverage with full-time coordinators rather than 3 areas of Scotland with part-time coordinators. And I think that the cities are slightly different. One of our major outcomes is to have good community resilience in Scotland, and that's mostly for the rural communities. But the urban areas are where the masses are, and really a better understanding is important for these people about how these people can, especially from a health and wellbeing point of view. So I think there's probably a new strategy required for the Central Belt and the cities, and how we approach Pathways to Rural Work. It's very different when you're talking about 4 schools in the Northwest, for example, that have a total of 600 kids between the 4 schools, whereas you might get 3 times that in a city school, in one city school. So there's a different strategy required for delivery. That's something that I would love to get into, and love to see the city finding out more about the countryside. And I think maybe the different strategy is we've got to take the country to the city rather than the other way around, which we do in the rural areas. So, for example, using Glasgow Green and having, large rural events in the city. Let's get the countryside to them. And that's something for RAS, it's something for RET, it's something for ourselves, it's something for Risabi, some of the other big organisations. So I do think if we're going to encourage responsible access to the countryside, and by that I mean not right to roam, but responsible access, dogs, sheep worrying, accessing responsibly, being aware of industries, all these things that we need to get through to the urbanised population. So it's a slightly different tack and a different strategy. But I think for Pathways to Rural Work, I think to be covering the majority of the rural areas with full-time coordinators would be our aim in 5 years' time. I'm actually just about to get the wet towel around the head and write the new business plan, so this will all be coming out in that quite soon. And that would be utopia to achieve that. The slight problem, which you've intimated already, is we're going into a really difficult financial period for businesses to support us. To ask for money from businesses just now is a hard ask. Some of the big funding charities will also be stretched because there'll be more requests to them. So it's a difficult financial time. So possibly in the next 2 or 3 years, sustaining what we have will be the success. with an aim of in 5 or 12 or 10 or whatever years beyond that, hopefully the financial world will improve and we can move on to greater things. But we do ultimately look for, oh, who's frozen? He's frozen. You still there?
I can still hear you.
Can you still hear me?
No problem. Still hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's the plan, that's the future. And I think, ideally we're looking for government funding, as everybody is, to support this nationally. But we understand we need to show the evidence from the projects running just now that it works. And we need to get to a point where after 5 or 6 years, we've got good case studies of young people who've come through the system and have gone into rural jobs that wouldn't have before. That's the bottom line.
Brilliant. Who next? Bryony, 5 years. Where do you see it?
Wow, if you were to repeat this podcast in 5 years' time, I think that I'd like to think, as Ian said, there'd be a lot more of us sat here covering a lot larger geographical area. I don't think I can say any more than Ian on that, who's kind of captured it perfectly. I suppose the second question, I'll keep it quite short and snappy. I'd say an organisation that promotes life and work in all of Scotland's countryside through education. I'd say that kind of.
You sold it to me. That's brilliant. I like the variation there, the go over absolutely everything, including the business plan. Then Bryony's 6 words just brings it all together very well. That sounds like I'm saying yours was rubbishy, and that's not what I meant.
No, listen, I have that reputation. Yeah. It must be something in the family. I think being a bladder.
Oh, fair enough. Kirsty and Tor, it'd be quite interesting to hear your sort of amalgamation of 5 years and what it is to you.
Yeah, so obviously I don't disagree with anything that's been said. Is there much left to say? I wish I'd gone first now. No, but I totally agree with more regional coverage. I don't know how much we'll be able to achieve in the 5 years. As you say, it's difficult climate, but definitely far greater number of people sitting here. And like Ian mentioned, I would like us to have some mainstream funding from the Scottish Government. And that would just really help establish us even more. And with that, in the same token, I'd like better brand awareness for our name, so people to know who we are without us having to explain it. That would help us, and that just comes with time and the more work that we do. In terms of how I would explain it to people, I have actually in the village I live in, because some people have asked me, what are you doing? Who do you work for? So I use a slightly different language, but I say that we open up young people's eyes to what the countryside can offer them and what the countryside can offer them and what they can offer the countryside. So it's a two-way process. Yeah,
I think it always is.
Yeah.
Just employment in general or moving into any form of work, it's got to be a two-way thing or it doesn't work.
Right.
Tors?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what the rest have said, and I would love to see us working, nationally so that we could cover all the secondary schools. I think if I was to go further into the future, I would love to think, as much as the others might hate me for saying this, that there might come a point where there wouldn't be the need for us to do the exact jobs that we're doing now, that we're so successful that actually the schools know that what's there, they know the opportunities, and they're seen in the same way as routes into university are seen, and it's seen, rural opportunities are seen as being as vital and critical as other roles, so that our jobs migrate to be more about helping understand what those future jobs are going to be and what's coming for young people that they haven't even envisaged or thought about with electronics and things within rural areas that maybe don't even we've not even imagined at the moment, and that might become more of our roles rather than the promoting the education and some of the knowledge that we're doing at the moment. So yeah, I think that's much further into the future than 5 years of being realistic.
I think that's right, Tors, and I think also that the thing, if we have learned anything from the last 5 years in the rural sector, it's the word is evolved. How quickly has the rural sector evolved in the last 5 years? It's frightening. And I think we have to represent that sector and make sure that the next generation understand what's ahead of them. And that's a bit of crystal ball, to be fair. But I think it's a very valid point, Tors. I think it's absolutely on the money. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's almost like between what Kirsty and Tor said there, it was almost like the sort of natural progression that you're looking for here. Get that sort of like strict government funded backing, massive for you guys to really push this forward into schools, and then that final, this is just now part of the curriculum. We're here. That's probably been the long-term goal for yourself, Ian, since this was ever a thing, getting rural education into schools. And yeah, as you say then, Tors, that looks to different changes in what you guys would be doing, but it's almost like the first goal has been ticked, which will be, as you say, further than 5 years down the line, I'm sure, but still quite an exciting prospect. It's been good to talk about a group of people and meet a group of people and see, not just sort of have a chat with one person and what their role is and what their sort of outlook is on a thing, whatever that might be, and actually see sort of how you work together. And it was quite cool to almost sort of build that relationship between you over the course of the hour. And I hope I've done you guys justice, first off. I hope I've hopefully allowed to give you enough of a sort of spotlight to show off CLS. But there's one thing that really stuck with me, and it was something you said, Ian, right at the start, was rural educations can't be done in the silos. It has to be a holistic approach. And I thought that was so true. We spoke various times throughout about how many parts there is to this whole rural industry, the education before getting into that industry. So I really like that. And I think when I do post about this podcast, it'll probably be the sort of centerpiece that I'll mention it first. But does anyone else have anything we sort of haven't covered that would maybe like to have covered?
There's one area I'd probably like to highlight, Wallace, and that is the key to a lot of this programme is within the outreach programme in each of the regions. A lot of the work the coordinators do is engaging with local businesses to get them involved with the education process. It's up to the businesses to engage with that. It's up to their future, depends on them engaging and the recruitment of the quality of the staff they take on, which fundamentally as a business, it's about making money, and fundamentally it's about getting good people who can make you that money. So that's subliminal messages lying in there that we need to build that cluster of businesses around each school and start to build the partnerships between the school and their local businesses. And that's a big part of the role as well. And I think that's key to, and obviously there are other organisations in there. I've mentioned Skill Development Scotland. Developing Young Workforce also do that, and we help them with the rural aspect of that. They cover all industries, and we help DYW and work very closely with Developing Young Workforce to do that. So there is government funding in a way there through DYW, but what we're hoping is we can really emphasise that funding into the rural sector, particularly in these rural community areas. But the businesses are absolutely key to the longevity of this programme. We won't always get funding from external areas. And hopefully, if we can see success and the businesses improve, we can then start to engage the businesses with some funding from them. If you get 500 businesses in the local area giving you, 50 quid a year each, then you've got a bit of cash in the pot. So it's almost like that crowdfunding with the businesses in the longer term. That's going to be a problem in the next few years, as I've highlighted, because of the current financial situation. But hopefully, in time, the value will be seen and they'll come forward. But engaging them to provide venues, engaging them to provide apprenticeships, to provide placements, these are all key factors out with the financial bit that we really, and the staff will do their best to engage businesses, as I do with other organisations. So that's a key part of the programme.
Very good. Anyone else? Anything else you think we should cover? I feel like it's been very good. I've certainly learned a lot myself. Sounding good. Perfect. Well, to those of you listening and watching on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed the sort of new feel to this R2Kast, slightly different to the rest. My plan now is to have 4 R2Kasts coming out a month, and 2, I better not do that way, get in trouble, 2 R2Kasts with a group coming out every month as well. So for some of the super fans, such as Mum and Dad, Maria and Gordon, who else? Oh my God, that's terrible. I know there's so many more. That's Charlotte. There's a lot of you out there that tell me that you listen to every podcast, and I appreciate you hugely for that. That's now going to be 6 episodes a month instead of just 4, or sometimes 5 if there's 5 Fridays. So look forward to that. For the four of you on, Ian, Bryony, Kirsty, and Tors, I hope you've enjoyed coming on, and I hope it's been worthwhile for CLS as well. So thank you to you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Not at all. Pleasure. I really have enjoyed it. So for everyone listening, we will see you next week for R2Kast number 71. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you then. Thank you, everyone, as well.
Well, that's it. Another R2Kast finished, another agricultural mind opened up. And I would just like to say that getting these guests on board, it does take time, and it always has done, but I've now went weekly, and with that comes even more time required. And I would just like to finally thank once more the Scottish Farmer for sponsoring the show and making that much more possible. Please be sure to get in touch if you've any ideas of people you'd like to see on the podcast, or maybe ideas you have for me presenting better, because I definitely do require that. See you in the next one.